After weeks of being savaged by the opposition and manufacturing industries campaign and the unions lately against its plans to introduce a carbon tax next year, the federal government got on the PR front foot this week, promising not only will the impact be minor, but millions will be financially better off. Climate Change Minister Greg Combet used a National Press Club speech to put a bit more flesh on the policy's bones, but it's still mostly skeleton. I spoke to Greg Combet at his Newcastle electorate office at the end of a busy week selling the tax. Well, Greg Combet, in your National Press Club speech this week, you said that the cost to the steel industry of the carbon tax would be $2.60 per tonne. Now, that's based on the CPRS principle of 94.5% assistance and the same definition of what constitutes a core pollution-intensive activity. Do we assume, therefore, that those things are being carried forward from the CPRS to the new scheme?
Well, what the government's indicated to the business community, and obviously those companies that are operating in the trade-exposed, emissions-intensive part of the economy, including steel, is that a lot of good work was done under the CPRS, the emissions trading scheme that the government proposed in the last term of Parliament, in how those companies in that part of the economy would be best shielded from the impact of a carbon price if our trade competitors overseas didn't have a comparable price. And so we're working on the basis of that initial proposal that was put forward.
Well, I'm not sure they all think it's good work. I mean, it's not just the 5.5% of permits that they have to buy, but also the definition they say is too narrow. And BlueScope says that there's 1.5 million tonnes of emissions that they have that are trade exposed that aren't covered, and that the real cost to them of the carbon tax is going to be $8 a tonne.
Well, there's lots of assumptions that underpin these things, Alan. I mean, the numbers that I put forward were based, in fact, on industry averages, not for a specific company, and also what I was putting forward was based on a $20 per tonne carbon price. And, of course, you can change the assumptions and produce different numbers. Readily acknowledge that. I also readily acknowledged in my speech to the press club that I was referring only to the core steel-making activities and that there are other areas of carbon liability that companies would have to bear. Some of that's included in the assistance that's provided. Other things, companies are suggesting they would have to accept the cost pass-through from their suppliers. All of these things are being worked through in detail, and I've certainly made very clear to BlueScope and to One Steel that we understand that they're under a lot of pressure from the high value of the Australian dollar, from the high cost of iron ore, from the high cost of coking coal, and that we're ready and willing and able to sit down further with those companies on the assistance package, and we need some feedback from them.
But where is the flexibility going to lie? In the definition of what can be compensated or the percentage of compensation?
Oh, well, I don't know that it's appropriate for me to speculate about that at this point in time. We've really got to have discussions about those issues with the companies themselves. But there was a lot of good work done. That is the fact of the matter. A couple of years ago, when these definitions, activity definitions, the scope of assistance that would be provided, the thresholds that need to be met, the point that I'm trying to make is there's really good detailed work that underpins all of this. What it gets down to is the extent of the outstanding carbon liability and the way in which that may change in future years. And that's the issue that we're really discussing with the steel industry.
Well, a couple of things have changed, obviously. You've now said that the households will get more than 50% of the revenue as compensation, and you've also said it must be revenue neutral, whereas the CPRS was a drain on the budget, especially in the early years. Now, if the households get more and it's going to be revenue neutral, that must mean that industry gets less.
Well, there are a number of categories of support that were provided for under the CPRS. It wasn't just household assistance, and it wasn't just assistance to emissions-intensive trade-exposed industries. It also included transitional assistance within the electricity generating sector, the establishment of a climate change action fund, and a host of other measures. Now, we're in tight fiscal circumstances. The government intends returning the budget to surplus in 2012-13. We intend this package to be budget neutral. We've announced a number of parameters that you point to that will use 50% of the revenue at least to assist households with price impacts. I guess what I'd say is that it is very important for constructive engagement on the part of the business community with the government in designing the parts of the package that are relevant to them. The time for, a lot of grand statements being made around the place around this issue, I think, are past on everyone's part. We've got to sit down and finalise the detailed design work in everyone's best interest.
They can see that it's not a magic pudding, Minister. I mean, you can't give everyone more, households more, revenue neutral and industry more. There's just so much money to go around.
Well, that's quite right, and so people need to sit down at the table seriously, do their sums and work carefully with the government on the design of the arrangements that are of importance to business, and we've set up mechanisms for that to occur. But it is important for people in the business community to understand that the government is committed to making this reform, and it's better off being inside the room, talking these issues through and trying to get the best possible outcome.
Well, isn't there a fundamental problem here, which is that the politics have changed completely in 2 years? I mean, in those days you had the coalition on side, now they're dead against it, and now you haven't even got a majority in Parliament. Isn't that right?
Well, I must say I'm coping with a number of complexities in all of this, and the politics is part of it. But at the end of the day, I mean, you can't choose all the circumstances. You've just got to work within them. But this is a very important economic reform for the country. It's, of course, motivated by the importance of reducing pollution and driving investment in clean energy, innovating in low emissions technology, bringing about change in our energy generation sector. These things are really important for the long-term competitiveness of the economy. We're proposing a market mechanism so that a price signal is sent to bring the cost of pollution into the cost of production. We're proposing comprehensive assistance, transitional assistance measures for most affected industries, supporting jobs. It's a complex set of policies, but a really important reform that is in our long-term national interest. There's no ducking it, there's no squibbing it, there's no choosing the perfect circumstances. Yes, we're up against Tony Abbott, who's like a scare campaign on a push bike, basically. He's got nothing of substance to say or to contribute to the policy debate. He just runs around trying to terrify people that they're going to lose their jobs and the cost of living is going to go through the roof. It's all rubbish. What we need is a proper, measured policy discussion, and it's very important for the business community to be actively engaged with that, with the government, so that we get the design right.
Just another specific issue. The starting price of the carbon tax is one thing, but most people in business say that the real issue is the trajectory from there. Now, Ross Garnaut has suggested CPI plus 4%, and that seems to have been implied in the CPRS as well. Is that what you're going to go with, real growth of 4%?
Well, we announced in February when we put the broad framework out for this mechanism, which is an emissions trading scheme, starting with a fixed price period of between 3 to 5 years, that the fixed price would be increased each year in addition to the rate of inflation. We haven't settled on what that escalator would be, but it'll be a modest one. Just to get the scheme going, to get the pathway through to an emissions trading scheme where, of course, you've got a floating price regime. The challenge in the detailed design work is to make sure that that transition from a fixed price period through to a floating price is as smooth as possible, and you're quite right that the business community has got a reliable basis upon which to forecast the prices in years ahead and make investment decisions accordingly. So that's another reason that detailed engagement with the business community is important.
Thanks very much for joining us, Minister.
Pleasure, Alan. Thank you.